I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe I just need to get it all off my chest. My name's John, and I've been married to Diane for 12 years. We have 2 kids together, Emma and Jake. Or, at least I thought we did. Recently, I found out that everything I believed about my life was a lie. For years, I had no reason to doubt Diane. We were your typical suburban family. 2 kids, nice house, busy jobs. I work in real estate, and Diane is in marketing. We met in college, fell in love fast, and got married young. I thought she was my soulmate, but about 6 months ago, I started noticing things were off. Diane became distant, cold even. She would spend more time on her phone, go out with friends more often, and avoid any kind of intimacy. When I asked her about it, she would always have some excuse. Work's been crazy, or I'm just tired, she'd say. I tried to be understanding, thinking maybe I wasn't pulling my weight as a husband, but deep down, something felt wrong. Then one day, while I was cleaning up after the kids, I found her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have even thought about looking through it. We trusted each other, or at least I thought we did. But something about that moment, I don't know, call it a gut feeling, made me pick it up. That's when I saw the messages. They were from a guy named Tom, someone I didn't know. At first, I thought it was just an old friend or a work contact, but as I read through the text, my stomach dropped. They weren't just messages. They were confessions of love, graphic descriptions of their time together, and plans for future meetups. And then the bombshell. I can't wait to see the kids again. They're growing up so fast. They're lucky to have a real father figure like me in their lives. It was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. This guy, Tom, was not just some fling. He was the biological father of Emma and Jake. Diane had been lying to me for years. I had raised these kids, loved them, done everything for them, and all this time, she had been living a double life with this guy. I confronted Diane that night. She tried to lie her way out of it at first, saying that I was crazy for even thinking something like that. But when I showed her the messages, she just broke down. "John, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I never meant for it to go this far." She admitted that the affair with Tom had been going on since before we got married. In fact, it never really ended. She had been with him the whole time, and the kids, our kids, were actually his. She'd known all along but had kept it hidden from me, letting me believe they were mine. I didn't even know what to say. I was numb. All I could do was listen as she made excuse after excuse. How she was afraid, how she didn't want to hurt me, how she didn't know how to stop once it all started. But none of it mattered. The betrayal was too deep. I couldn't believe that the woman I had loved for over a decade had been capable of this. That night, I slept in the guest room, trying to figure out what to do next. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was the years of lies and the realization that my entire life had been built on falsehoods. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay with her, and I wasn't going to let her keep those kids from me. They might not be mine by blood, but they were still my kids. After that night, everything changed. I was still in shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool. Confronting Diane had been a disaster. She broke down, sobbing and apologizing. But there was no way to undo what she had done. The kids were in the dark, oblivious to the storm brewing in our house. They were still my kids in my heart, but the reality hit me hard. I was raising another man's children. I needed time to think. Divorce was an obvious choice, but I couldn't just leave like that. Diane had betrayed me on such a deep level. I couldn't trust her with anything anymore, especially not the kids. And if she'd been lying about the kids being mine, who knew what else she was capable of? The next few days were a blur. Diane tried to act like everything was fine, like we could work through this. I let her keep thinking that, for a while at least. I played along, pretending I was considering going to counseling, maybe trying to save the marriage, but deep down, I was plotting my escape. I started doing some research, looking into paternity laws and custody rights. I found out that even though the kids weren't biologically mine, I still had legal rights because I was their presumed father on paper. That was my opening. I needed to protect my connection to them. But I also knew Diane was manipulative. She'd try to take the kids if things got ugly, and I couldn't let that happen. I also needed financial independence. Diane had been handling the bills for the most part, but I had access to our accounts. I started quietly moving money into a separate savings account under the radar. It wasn't a lot, but enough to give me a cushion for whatever was coming next. Then I made my next big move. I started looking at properties. Diane had always talked about moving to the city, being closer to Tom. Now I understood why. But I had different plans. I didn't want to stay anywhere near them, anywhere that reminded me of the life we'd built. I wanted out, and I wanted the kids to come with me. I found a ranch in Texas. A big place, far from everything, but still close enough to a town with schools and amenities. It wasn't fancy, but it was exactly what I needed, a new beginning. I put in an offer, all under the guise of a family getaway that I was planning for the future. Diane had no idea what I was really up to. During all of this, I kept my distance from Diane. She could sense something was up, but every time she brought it up, I brushed it off. I'm just processing things, I'd say. I need time. In reality, I was putting the pieces of my escape plan together. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal with the kids. Emma and Jake were my world. I still woke them up for school every morning, packed their lunches, and tucked them in at night. But now, every time I looked at them, there was a gnawing doubt in the back of my mind. I hated that I even had to question it, whether I was really their father. Diane had destroyed that certainty, but none of that was their fault, and I wasn't going to let her take them from me. One night, while Diane was out, I went through her things. I knew I needed more evidence if I was going to make a clean break and keep the kids. In her office drawer, I found letters, love letters from Tom. They weren't recent, but they confirmed everything I already knew. They had been involved for years, way before our marriage even began. I also found a secret phone hidden in the bottom of one of her old purses. I unlocked it and found messages between her and Tom. Explicit, disgusting messages. Plans to meet up while I was at work. Their fantasies about being together with their kids. It made me sick to my stomach, but at the same time, it gave me the leverage I needed. I copied everything. The letters, the texts, all of it. I wasn't going to confront her again, not yet. I needed to be smart about this. I knew the moment I let her know what I was planning, she'd try to twist everything to her advantage. She'd use the kids against me. I talked to a lawyer. Discreetly, of course. She confirmed what I already knew. I could file for divorce on grounds of adultery, but I had to be strategic about it if I wanted full custody. We discussed the ranch in Texas and how moving the kids out of state might look. I was prepared to fight, and I was going to win. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about giving Emma and Jake the best life possible, away from the lies and deceit their mother had built around them. Over the next few weeks, I continued putting things in place. I secretly set up the ranch in my name, finalized my new savings account, and made sure every detail was handled, all while keeping up the appearance of a man trying to work things out for the sake of his family. Diane had no idea what was coming, but one thing was clear. I was going to leave her, and I was taking the kids with me. A few weeks later, everything started coming together. I finalized the purchase of the ranch in Texas. It was bigger than I had imagined, but that was the point. Space to breathe, to start over, far from Diane and Tom. Every night, after the kids were in bed, I'd sit in my office and plan how I would break the news, how I'd move, how I'd explain everything to the kids. It was an all-consuming obsession. Diane, in the meantime, kept trying to fix things. She'd cook me dinner, which she hadn't done in years, or suggest we go on a weekend getaway. But I saw through it all. It wasn't love, it was guilt. She was trying to smooth things over, make me forget the fact that she had lied to me for over a decade. Every time I saw her with Emma and Jake, it felt like a stab in the chest. She knew the truth, and had let me play the fool for years. One night, as we sat down for dinner, she brought it up again. "John, we should really talk about what's going on between us," she said, pushing her plate away. "I know things have been hard, but I think we can make it work if we try. For the kids." I almost laughed. For the kids? The kids she knew weren't mine, but let me believe they were? The kids she had kept from their biological father for years, while pretending I was the only dad they had? I bit my tongue and nodded instead, pretending to go along with her ridiculous fantasy. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe we should talk, but not tonight. I'm not ready yet." She sighed, clearly frustrated that I wasn't falling into her trap of working things out. But I didn't care. All I needed was a little more time to put the final pieces in place. The ranch was almost ready. My savings were secure, and my lawyer had drawn up the initial papers for the divorce. I was ready to pull the trigger, but I had to make sure Diane didn't suspect a thing. One weekend, I told her I had a work trip coming up. It wasn't a lie. I did have to go out of town, but not for the reason she thought. I was flying down to Texas to finalize some things with the ranch, making sure everything was in order for the kids and me when the time came. Diane barely batted an eye when I told her. She was used to me traveling for work, and she was probably looking forward to spending some alone time with Tom while I was gone. The trip to Texas was quick, but important. I met with the school board. talked to local businesses, and made sure everything was in place for our new life. The ranch was perfect. A big, sprawling property with space for the kids to run around, fresh air, and the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. It felt like the first real step towards freedom. While I was there, I got a text from Diane. "Miss you. Can't wait for you to come home." The irony was almost too much to bear. Here I was, setting up a life without her, and she was acting like nothing had ever happened. I didn't reply. When I got back home, things started to escalate. Diane was getting suspicious. She noticed I was more distant, more focused on things outside the home. One night, after the kids were in bed, she cornered me in the kitchen. "John, we need to talk." "Really talk," she said, her voice sharp. "I can't keep pretending like everything's okay when you're acting like this." I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I kept my cool. "What do you mean, acting like what?" "Like you don't care," she snapped. "You're not even trying anymore. You barely talk to me. You're never around, and when you are, it's like you're a million miles away." I shrugged. "I've been busy with work. I told you that." "That's bullshit, John," she shouted. "This isn't about work. This is about us, about our family. I know things haven't been perfect, but we can't just give up." I almost lost it right there. The nerve of her, standing there, talking about our family, as if she hadn't been the one to destroy it. But I knew I had to keep calm. If I exploded now, everything I'd been working for would be at risk. "I'm not giving up, Diane," I said quietly. "But things aren't the same anymore. You know that." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break down again. But instead, she turned cold, her eyes narrowing. "What are you planning, John?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm not stupid. Something's going on." I stared at her, trying to keep my face neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're lying," she hissed. "I can feel it. You've been acting weird for weeks now. What? Are you seeing someone else? Is that it?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Me having an affair? After everything she had done? But instead, I shook my head. "No, Diane. I'm not seeing anyone." She didn't believe me. I could tell. But she couldn't prove anything, and that was enough for me. I walked past her, not giving her the satisfaction of a real fight. That night, as I lay in bed, I knew it was time. I couldn't keep this up much longer. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told her to move forward with the divorce papers. We set a date for the filing, and I gave her all the evidence I had collected. The messages, the letters, the proof of Diane's long-term affair with Tom. It was all going into the case. In the meantime, I started preparing the kids. I didn't tell them what was going on, of course, but I started talking about the idea of adventures and how sometimes families need new beginnings. Emma was excited by the thought of moving to a ranch, living with horses and wide open spaces. Jake didn't say much, but I could tell he liked the idea too. They were ready, even if they didn't know the full truth yet. The final piece fell into place when I received a notification from the court. Our divorce was officially filed. Diane hadn't been served yet, but it was only a matter of time. I was about to drop the bomb, and I knew there was no going back. The day Diane got served with the divorce papers was one of the most surreal moments of my life. I had been waiting for this, planning for it, but when it finally happened, it felt like the ground shifted under my feet. The kids were at school, and I was working from home when I heard the knock at the door. It was the process server, holding the envelope that was about to blow everything up. I didn't say much, just nodded, and thanked him before setting the envelope on the kitchen counter. My stomach twisted with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Diane would be home in a few hours, and once she opened that envelope, there would be no more pretending. I sat in my office, pretending to work, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until Diane walked through the door. Finally, I heard her car pull into the driveway. The front door opened, and I heard her heels click across the floor as she came into the house, calling out to me and the kids like it was just another normal day. "John, you home?" she called. I stayed silent, my heart pounding in my chest. I heard her footsteps stop as she spotted the envelope on the counter. There was a long pause, and then the sound of the envelope being ripped open. "What the hell is this?" she shouted from the kitchen, her voice sharp and filled with anger. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, my heart racing. She was holding the divorce papers in her hands, her face pale and furious. Her eyes flicked up to mine, full of rage and disbelief. "Are you serious?" she spat, waving the papers in the air. "You're divorcing me? Just like that?" I kept my voice calm, though inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. Diane, I've thought about this for a long time. This isn't sudden. Her hands were trembling as she looked down at the papers again, flipping through the pages. Adultery? Are you kidding me, John? You're really going to use that against me? I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchen island. You've been lying to me for over a decade. You've had an affair with Tom since before we were married. The kids aren't even mine, Diane. Her face went white at that. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, her mouth slightly open. I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that her lies had finally caught up with her. That doesn't mean we have to end it like this, she said, her voice shaking. John, we can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can work through it. I shook my head. There's nothing left to fix. You destroyed any chance we had the moment you decided to lie to me about the kids. This marriage has been a lie from the start, and I'm done. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a brief second, I saw the Diane I had married, the woman I thought I had built a life with. But that Diane was a stranger to me now, someone I didn't recognize. You can't take the kids, she said, her voice suddenly cold and hard. They're mine, John. You have no right. That was the trigger, her claiming the kids as if I had no right to them. After everything I had done, everything I had been through, sent a surge of anger through me. I stepped closer to her, trying to keep my voice steady. They may not be mine biologically, but I've been their father their entire lives. I've raised them, loved them, and I'm not about to let you tear them away from me just because you're guilty. Diane crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. You're not going to win this, John. You think you can just take them and run off to Texas? You don't even have a legal claim to them. I smirked, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Actually, I do. The courts don't care about biology when it comes to parental rights. I've been listed as their father from the start, and I've got plenty of evidence of your affair. This is going to get ugly, Diane, and it's all on you. For a moment, she just stood there, glaring at me, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I could tell she was calculating, trying to figure out her next move, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. So what? She spat. You're going to move them to some ranch in Texas and play cowboy? You think that's what's best for them? They're used to their life here, their school, their friends. They'll adapt, I said firmly, and they'll be better off without the lies you've been feeding them their entire lives. Diane's face contorted with anger, but then, as if a switch flipped, her expression softened. She tried a different tactic, manipulation. I had seen it before, but now I recognized it for what it was. John, please, she said, her voice soft and pleading. I know I've made mistakes, but don't do this to the kids. They need both of us. We can work out a way to co-parent, to make this work. We don't have to destroy everything. I shook my head, not buying it. We're already destroyed, Diane. There's no going back from this. Her eyes darkened again, and she threw the papers on the counter with a frustrated growl. You're making a mistake, John. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, turning to walk away, but at least I'll be free. As I headed back to my office, I could feel Diane's gaze burning into my back. I knew she wasn't done. This was just the beginning of the fight, but I had come too far to back down now. Over the next few days, things were tense in the house. We barely spoke to each other, and when we did, it was clipped and hostile. The kids could sense something was wrong, but they didn't know the details yet. I wanted to wait until the timing was right before explaining things to them. Meanwhile, Diane started meeting with her lawyer, trying to build a case against me. I knew this was going to be a war, and she wasn't going to go down without a fight. But I was ready. I had everything in place. The ranch, the money, the legal plan. She could try to take me down, but I wasn't going to let her win. Then one evening, after the kids were in bed, Diane confronted me again. You really think you're going to win, don't you? She said, standing in the doorway of my office. You think you're going to take the kids and run off to your little ranch like some hero. But you're not. You're a coward, John. You're running away from your problems instead of facing them. I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of calm. I'm not running away, Diane. I'm taking control of my life for the first time in years. Her lip curled in disgust, and she turned to leave. We'll see about that, she muttered under her breath. As she walked away, I knew she was planning something, but whatever it was, I was ready for it. I wasn't the same man she had manipulated for years. I was done being her victim. This was a turning point. There was no going back now. Things escalated quickly after that last confrontation. Diane wasn't just angry, she was in full-on attack mode. I could see it in the way she started behaving around the house. She was methodical, cold, and calculating. It was like she was a different person entirely, someone who no longer cared about keeping up the facade of being a loving wife or mother. A few days after being served the divorce papers, Diane met with her lawyer, and that's when things really hit the fan. The next morning, I was served with a temporary restraining order. She had filed a claim saying I was emotionally unstable and unfit to be around the kids. The document painted me as some kind of ticking time bomb, prone to angry outbursts and dangerous behavior. I was furious when I read it. This was her move, her desperate attempt to keep me away from Emma and Jake. She knew I had the upper hand legally, and this was her way of dragging things through the mud, trying to paint me as the bad guy. But it wasn't going to work. I called my lawyer right away, and she reassured me that this was a common tactic in divorces where one parent feels threatened. It's temporary, she said. We'll fight it in court, and once the judge hears your side, this will all go away. Still, it was a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe Diane had stooped this low. She was willing to lie about me, about who I was, just to win. The next few weeks were hell. I couldn't see the kids unless it was under court-ordered supervision. Diane made sure they only heard her side of the story, feeding them lies about why I wasn't around. Emma stopped calling me Daddy and started referring to me as John, like I was some stranger in her life. Jake, still too young to fully understand, just became distant, confused about what was happening. Diane, on the other hand, was playing her part perfectly. She acted like the concerned mother, taking the kids to school, making a big show of being involved in their lives while whispering venom into their ears about me. Every time I saw her at the supervised visits, she was all smiles in front of the kids, but her eyes were cold, calculating. The worst part was that I couldn't tell the kids the truth. I couldn't sit them down and explain everything. All I could do was watch them slowly drift away from me, confused by the lies their mother was feeding them. It broke my heart every single time. One afternoon, during one of those supervised visits, Emma came up to me and asked the question I had been dreading. "Why are you and Mom getting divorced?" she asked, her big brown eyes wide with confusion. I froze. What was I supposed to say? She was only 8, too young to understand betrayal, the lies, the years of infidelity. I couldn't just blurt out the truth. Not like this. "We just don't get along anymore, sweetheart," I said softly, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes grown-ups have to live in different places to be happier." "But why aren't you living with us?" she pressed, her voice trembling. "Mom said you don't love us anymore." I felt a lump form in my throat. I had expected Diane to play dirty, but hearing that she was telling the kids I didn't love them, it crushed me. "That's not true," I said firmly, kneeling down to her level. "I love you and Jake more than anything in the world. What's happening between me and your mom isn't your fault. I just need you to know that, okay?" She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she? I wanted to pull her into my arms, to hold her and tell her everything was going to be okay, but the supervisor was watching closely. I was only allowed limited physical contact during these visits, and even though I hated it, I had to follow the rules. After the visit, I went home feeling more defeated than ever. How had my life spiraled so far out of control? I was stuck in a nightmare, unable to break free. The ranch in Texas felt like a distant dream, something that might never happen at this rate. I knew I had to do something drastic to shift the momentum back in my favor. So, with my lawyer's help, I started gathering everything. The emails, the text messages, the evidence of Diane's affair with Tom. I had already collected most of it when I first discovered the affair, but now I needed to present it in a way that would make an impact in court. My lawyer filed a motion to have the restraining order lifted, citing the evidence of Diane's infidelity and the fact that she had been lying about the kids' paternity. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the kids and the toxic environment Diane was creating for them. I wasn't going to let her poison them against me any longer. A few weeks later, we finally had our day in court. I was nervous as hell walking into that courtroom, but I knew I had to keep it together. Diane was there, sitting next to her lawyer, looking smug and confident. She had her game face on, but I knew what was coming. She had no idea how much evidence I had collected. When it was time to present our case, my lawyer laid it all out. The years of deception, the affair with Tom, the paternity tests proving the kids weren't biologically mine. The judge's face grew darker with every piece of evidence we presented. Diane's lawyer tried to object, but it was clear the judge wasn't having any of it. Then it was Diane's turn to testify. She tried to play the victim, claiming that she had made mistakes but that she had always been a good mother. She said I was unstable, emotionally abusive, and unfit to care for the kids. But my lawyer was ready for her. We picked apart every lie she told, using the evidence I had gathered to disprove each one. The moment that really sealed it was when we showed the judge the messages between Diane and Tom, the explicit ones, where they talked about keeping the kids away from me and how Tom couldn't wait to raise them as his own. The courtroom went silent, and Diane's smug expression faltered. She knew she was losing. By the time the hearing was over, the judge had ordered the restraining order lifted and granted me partial custody of the kids, pending a final custody hearing. Diane tried to argue, but the judge shut her down. I had won the first battle, but I knew the war wasn't over yet. When we left the courthouse, Diane didn't say a word to me. She just glared at me, her eyes full of hatred. But I didn't care anymore. I had taken the first step toward getting my life back, and I wasn't going to stop until I had full custody of Emma and Jake. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The fight wasn't over, but I was finally on the right path. Winning that first court battle gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. The restraining order was gone, and I was finally allowed to spend time with the kids without a supervisor watching our every move. But the war with Diane wasn't over. She was still determined to drag this out, to make sure I didn't get full custody. I knew she wasn't going to make things easy, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The court granted me partial custody while we waited for the final hearing. Emma and Jake would spend weekends with me, which was a huge relief. The first weekend they stayed with me, it was like nothing had ever happened. We watched movies, made pancakes, and went to the park. For those 2 days, it felt like we were a real family again, and for a brief moment, I could forget about all the mess Diane had created. But the hardest part was still explaining things to the kids. They were starting to pick up on the tension between Diane and me, and they had more and more questions. I couldn't keep dodging them forever, and I knew I had to tell them something before Diane filled their heads with more lies. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the backyard, Emma asked me again, "Why aren't you living with us anymore, Dad?" I took a deep breath and sat down next to her. "Emma, there are some things that are really hard to explain, but I want you to know that I love you and Jake more than anything. That will never change." She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes, and it broke my heart. "But why can't you and Mom just get along?" she asked, her voice trembling. I sighed, trying to find the right words. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and those mistakes are hard to fix. Your mom and I, we've made some mistakes that we can't undo. But we're still a family, right? She asked, her voice small. "Yes," I said, pulling her into a hug. "We'll always be a family, no matter what happens. I'll always be here for you and Jake." That seemed to satisfy her for now, but I knew there would be more questions later. I couldn't tell her everything, not yet. She was too young to understand the full extent of what her mother had done, and I didn't want to burden her with that. In the meantime, I kept working on the ranch. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I could focus on something positive. Every time I made the trip down to Texas, it felt like a step closer to freedom. The kids loved hearing about it. I started talking to them about what it would be like to live there, how they'd have space to run around, and maybe even get a dog. I didn't tell Diane about the ranch yet. She was still trying to dig her claws into kids, and I didn't want her to know that I had a plan for a new life without her. The thought of leaving everything behind and starting fresh with Emma and Jake in Texas kept me going, even on the hardest days. But Diane wasn't going down without a fight. She kept pushing back in court, trying to paint me as unstable, unfit to raise the kids. Every time we had a hearing, she'd come in with a new accusation or a fresh complaint, trying to sway the judge in her favor. But my lawyer was good. She saw right through Diane's tactics and countered every move she made. The final custody hearing was looming, and I knew it was going to be a battle. Diane had hired a new lawyer, one who was known for being aggressive and ruthless. I was nervous, but I wasn't going to let her win. I had too much at stake. Emma and Jake's future depended on it. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Diane started pulling more stunts. She'd make passive-aggressive comments in front of the kids, trying to turn them against me. "Oh, your dad didn't tell you? He's moving to Texas. He probably won't even be around much longer," she'd say, planting seeds of doubt in their minds. I tried to reassure them, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. Diane was playing dirty, and I knew I had to be careful not to stoop to her level. I couldn't let her win by dragging the kids into this mess. But every time I saw them after a visit with her, I could see the damage she was doing, little by little. Then, something happened that changed everything. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I got a call from my lawyer. "John, we just got some new evidence," she said, her voice urgent. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Diane's been seeing Tom again," she said. "We have photos of them together. It looks like they've been meeting up regularly, even during the custody process. I sat down, the weight of the situation sinking in. "You're kidding me," I muttered. "After everything, she's still seeing him?" "Yep," my lawyer confirmed. "And this time, it's going to work in our favor. The judge isn't going to like this, especially after Diane's claims that she's focused on the kids. This could be the break we've been waiting for." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Diane had been so focused on trying to destroy me that she hadn't even bothered to keep her own affair under wraps. I was furious, but at the same time, I felt a sense of vindication. She had been lying to everyone for years, and now the truth was finally coming out. We went into the final custody hearing armed with that new evidence. Diane walked into the courtroom looking confident. But the second those photos were presented, her expression changed. She tried to deny it at first, but it was clear that the judge wasn't buying it. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of Emma and Jake, and Diane was given visitation rights. The kids would be living with me full-time, and we were free to move to Texas whenever we were ready. Diane tried to argue, but the judge had made up his mind. She had destroyed any credibility she had left. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. The whole situation had taken a toll on me, on the kids, on everyone involved. But at least now, we could finally move on. I picked up Emma and Jake from school that afternoon, and as we drove home, I told them the news. "We're going to be moving soon," I said, trying to sound excited. "We're going to Texas, to the ranch I told you about. It's going to be a new adventure." Jake cheered from the back seat and Emma smiled, though I could see a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "What about Mom?" she asked quietly. "She'll still see you," I said gently, "but you'll be living with me from now on." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully understand what that meant yet. I knew it was going to take time, but I was ready for that. We had a long road ahead of us, but at least now, we were free to take that road. As we pulled into the driveway, I looked at my kids in the rearview mirror and felt a sense of peace wash over me. We were going to be okay. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. It was a strange feeling, driving down to Texas with everything we owned packed into the back of a moving truck. Emma and Jake sat in the back seat of the car, excited but quiet, while I kept my eyes on the road, trying to focus on the future rather than the chaos we were leaving behind. In just a few days, we'd be starting a new life on the ranch, far away from the lies, the fights, and everything that Diane had put us through. The kids were adjusting, but it wasn't easy. Emma was still processing everything. Jake, being younger, seemed to take it all in stride, though I could tell he missed his friends. I had tried to explain everything to them as best I could, but they were still confused about why we had to leave, why things had to change so drastically. All I could do was promise them that this new life was going to be better, that we were going to be happy again. When we finally arrived at the ranch, it was like stepping into another world. The open field stretched out as far as I could see, the fresh air filling my lungs. It was the kind of place where you could just breathe. The house was bigger than anything we had lived in before, and as soon as we pulled up, Jake jumped out of the car, running around like he had been set free. "This is so cool," he shouted, spinning in circles. Emma followed behind, a little more reserved, but I could see the hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "It's huge," she said softly, looking at the house and then at the vast land around us. I knelt down next to her. "It's our new home, Emma. We're going to build something great here." She nodded, still uncertain, but I knew she'd come around. It was a big change, and it would take time. But time was something we had now. We were finally free from Diane's grasp, and I was determined to make this work, for the kids and for myself. We spent the first few days getting settled. There was a lot to do. Unpacking, setting up rooms, getting the kids registered at their new school. I threw myself into it, keeping busy to avoid thinking about everything we'd left behind. The ranch was a project in itself, and there was plenty of work to be done. Fencing to be repaired, fields to be tended, animals to take care of. It was hard work, but it felt good. It was a kind of work that kept my hands and mind busy, giving me a sense of purpose again. Emma and Jake started school the following week. It was small and local, much different from the big suburban school they were used to. I could tell Emma was nervous. She always had a hard time with change, but Jake, as usual, made friends quickly. Every day when they came home, they had stories to tell about their new adventures, and little by little, I could see them adjusting to the new life. But despite the progress, Diane wasn't done with us. She had visitation rights, and while we were hundreds of miles away now, she wasn't going to let go easily. She called the kids constantly, always pushing to know when she could come visit, when they would come see her. I didn't want to deny her access, but it was hard to listen to her try to play the doting mother after everything she had done. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, my phone rang. It was Diane. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake the kids. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cool. "About the kids. They're still mine too, John." I sighed. "We've already been through this, Diane. You have visitation rights, but they live with me now. That's the arrangement." She was silent for a moment, then spoke again, her voice harder. "You can't just run off with them. They need their mother, and you're not going to replace me." "I'm not trying to replace you," I said, feeling the familiar anger rising in my chest. "But I'm not going to let you screw up their lives either. They're finally starting to settle in here, and I'm not going to let you mess that up." "This isn't over," she snapped. "I'll find a way to get them back. You'll see." I ended the call, feeling the weight of her threats settle over me like a dark cloud. Even from hundreds of miles away, she was still trying to control things, still trying to hold on to what little power she had left. But I wasn't going to let her win. I had fought too hard to get here, to give the kids a fresh start, and I wasn't about to let her take that away from them or from me. As the weeks went by, I threw myself deeper into ranch life. It was exactly what I needed, a place where I could focus on something real, something I could control. Every day was a new challenge, whether it was fixing a fence, tending to the animals, or working on the house. The physical labor was exhausting, but it cleared my mind in a way that nothing else had. The kids were adjusting too. Jake loved the freedom of the ranch, spending hours outside playing and exploring. Emma was quieter, more reserved, but she was coming around. She loved the horses, and I promised her that once we got settled, we'd get a dog. That seemed to make her happy, at least for now. And then, something unexpected happened. Her name was Naomi. She was a local woman who worked at the feed store in town. We had met a few times when I had gone to pick up supplies for the ranch. At first, it was just small talk. She'd ask how the kids were settling in, and I'd tell her about our progress on the ranch. But over time, we started talking more. She had a calm, grounded presence that I found comforting, and after everything with Diane, I needed someone like that in my life. One afternoon, after picking up some supplies, Naomi invited me out for coffee. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that, but something about her just put me at ease. So I agreed. We met at a small cafe in town, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself relaxing. Naomi was easy to talk to, and as we sat there, sipping coffee and chatting about everything from ranch life to raising kids, I realized just how much I had missed this connection. With Diane, it had been years since I had felt anything remotely close to this kind of peace. After that, we started seeing each other more regularly. At first, it was just as friends. She'd come over to the ranch to help with the horses or bring over baked goods for the kids. But slowly, something deeper began to grow between us. It wasn't rushed or forced, and that's what made it feel right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was healing. Naomi wasn't just good for me. She was good for the kids too. Emma adored her, and Jake loved having someone else around to dote on him. It wasn't long before she became part of our lives, and before I knew it, I was falling for her. But as things between Naomi and me grew, Diane became more of a problem. She kept pushing for more visitation time, claiming that the kids were losing their connection with her. I knew it was all about control. She couldn't stand the fact that I was moving on, that I had built a life without her. But I wasn't going to let her win. One night, after another heated phone call with Diane, I sat outside on the porch, staring out at the stars. Naomi came out to join me, sitting down beside me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, but I knew she could see through me. "It's just, Diane, she won't stop. She's trying to use the kids to control everything." Naomi reached over, taking my hand in hers. "You've done everything you can, John. The kids know who's really there for them. Diane might try to make things difficult, but she can't take away what you built with them." I looked over at her, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. She was right. Diane could try to make things as difficult as she wanted. But at the end of the day, Emma and Jake knew who was there for them. I had fought for them, and I wasn't going to stop. That night, as I held Naomi close, I realized something. I had finally found peace. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but I had found someone who loved me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could really start living again. Things finally began to settle into a rhythm. The ranch, the kids, and Naomi. It all felt like the life I had been searching for, the one I deserved after everything I'd been through. The kids were happy, and Naomi had seamlessly become part of our lives. I didn't think it was possible to feel whole again after Diane had shattered everything, but somehow we were finding our way. But Diane, she wouldn't let go. Even though we had settled into this new life, Diane was still lurking in the background, trying to maintain control. She started pushing for more visitation time, claiming that the kids were distancing themselves from her. The reality was, Emma and Jake were finally finding stability here with me, something they never had when we were all living under Diane's constant lies. They were thriving, and she hated it. Then, Diane crossed a line. It started with phone calls, her voice dripping with fake concern, asking when she could see the kids again. She was relentless, calling multiple times a day. I tried to keep things civil, but it was wearing me down. She would bring up Tom, how he missed seeing the kids, and that was the final straw for me. One evening, she called while we were having dinner. Naomi had cooked, and we were laughing around the table when my phone rang. I didn't want to answer, but something told me I needed to. I stepped out onto the porch and picked up the call. "I need to see the kids this weekend," Diane said, not even bothering with the greeting. "I already told you, Diane. You'll see them when it's your scheduled time," I replied, trying to keep my cool. "I'm their mother, John. I have every right to see them whenever I want," she snapped. "And I'm their father, and they live with me now. I'm not keeping them from you, but this constant pushing, it's not helping anyone, especially not the kids," I said, feeling the frustration bubbling up. "They're forgetting who I am," she said, her voice softer now, almost desperate. "You've turned them against me." "No, Diane," I said firmly. "You did that yourself. You lied to me, to them, for years. You don't get to rewrite history just because it's convenient now." There was silence on the other end, and for a second, I thought maybe she had hung up. But then, she spoke again, her voice shaking with anger. "If I can't see them, I'll make sure they hate you for taking them away from me." And that was it. I had reached my breaking point. "I'm done, Diane," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I've tried to be patient, to let you still have a place in their lives, but I'm done playing these games. I'll be talking to my lawyer tomorrow to put an end to this. You're not going to keep manipulating them, or me." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I had let her control things for far too long, and now it was time to put a stop to it, once and for all. That night, I called my lawyer and told her everything. We discussed the legal steps to cut back Diane's visitation rights even further. It wasn't that I wanted to completely take the kids away from her, but I couldn't keep letting her poison their lives with her manipulations. I had to protect them, even if it meant more legal battles. The next morning, as I was making breakfast for the kids, Naomi came into the kitchen. She could see the tension still written across my face from the night before. "Everything okay?" she asked, leaning against the counter. I shook my head. "No. I think it's time to put an end to Diane's influence. She's not letting go, and it's hurting the kids. I'm going to file for restricted visitation." Naomi nodded, understanding. "I think that's the right move, John. They need stability, and they're not going to get that if she keeps pulling them back into her games." I sighed, feeling the weight of everything. I just want this to be over. I want the kids to be happy. I want us to be happy. Naomi stepped closer, wrapping her arms around me. "We will be. This is just the last hurdle." And she was right. Over the next few months, we went back to court. I presented everything: the constant harassment, the manipulation, the threats Diane had made about turning the kids against me. My lawyer was a rock, guiding me through every step of the process. In the end, the court agreed with me. Diane's visitation was reduced to supervised visits, and any unscheduled contact had to go through a mediator. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like the end of a long, painful chapter, one that had taken years of my life and left scars I would carry forever. But it was also the start of something new, something better. After the court ruling, Diane tried to see the kids a few more times, but it didn't last. Emma and Jake had started to distance themselves from her, naturally gravitating toward the stability they had with me. Over time, the calls stopped, and Diane faded from our lives. I knew it wasn't easy for the kids, especially Emma, who still held on to the hope that her mom would change. But eventually, they accepted it. They were moving on, and so was I. Months later, Naomi and I were standing on the front porch of the ranch, watching Emma and Jake run around in the yard, chasing our new dog. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the fields. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I had been searching for ever since everything had fallen apart. Naomi slid her hand into mine. "We made it," she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. I looked at her, feeling more grateful than I could ever express. Yeah, we did. Things weren't perfect, but they were good. Better than I had ever thought they could be after everything with Diane. The kids were thriving, and Naomi and I had built something real together, something I didn't think I would ever find again. One evening, as we were all sitting around the dinner table, laughing and talking, I realized how far we'd come. This was my family now, Naomi, Emma, Jake, and me. We had survived the storm, and now we were building a life together, free from the lies, the betrayal, and the chaos Diane had left in her wake. A few months later, Naomi and I got married in a quiet ceremony at the ranch, with just a few close friends and the kids by our side. It was simple, perfect. Emma and Jake were thrilled, and I could see how much they had come to love Naomi, how much they had come to rely on the stability she brought to their lives. Diane tried to reach out a few times after the wedding, but the kids didn't want to see her. They had moved on, just like I had, and eventually, Diane got the message and disappeared from our lives for good. Looking back, I realized that everything I had gone through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the endless court battles, had led me to this moment. It had been hell, but I had come out stronger on the other side. I had my kids, I had Naomi, and I had a new life. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how you respond. Diane tried to destroy me, but in the end, she only destroyed herself. And I was able to take back my life, piece by piece, and build something better. So, if anyone reading this is going through something similar, just know it gets better. It's going to be hard, and there will be times when you feel like giving up. But if you keep pushing, if you keep fighting for what's right, you'll find your way out of the darkness. And on the other side, there's peace, there's healing, and there's hope.